Hi, everybody. Welcome to Dive Deep. I'm Shelby Cornett, and I'm the ministry assistant at Cambridge City Christian Church, and this is Danny.
Hey, Shelby.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good, good. How's your week been so far?
Good. I have an update.
Okay.
I watched The Princess Bride.
You did. Yes, you told us that you watched it finally, right?
I did.
Welcome to the rest of humanity.
Yeah.
Yeah, so what were your thoughts?
I liked it.
I told you would.
I didn't have any expectations because I had no idea. I didn't even look it up. I didn't see what it was about or anything. And it was funny.
It was funny. It's a cute movie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was, I don't know what I expected, but it was not what I expected. I don't know.
So was it life-changing?
It's totally
Yeah,
I'm
I
a
figured it would
different person now.
be. Yeah. No,
But I am glad I watched it.
it's fun. It's just a fun movie to watch. I mean,
Yeah.
I've probably watched it a dozen times through the years,
Yeah.
you know. It's kind of one of those movies where it's just fun and you could turn your brain off and,
Mm-hmm.
you know. So, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, congratulations.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So you can't make fun of me
No,
anymore.
I can't. We'll just have to
And the
find-
people at church can't make fun of me on Sunday mornings.
We'll just have to find another movie now.
I'm sure there's.
All right.
I would name a few, but
Yeah.
I don't want to get it started.
Yep.
Okay.
All right.
Sermon stuff.
Yes. Yeah.
This week was Jesus Arrives.
Mm-hmm.
So he arrived into Jerusalem this
Yeah.
week.
Yeah, we're getting into the final what? This was Mark 11, so there's 16 chapters in the book of Mark. So we're talking 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. So we've got 6 chapters. We have about 6 weeks left in the series. Well, we're down now. Well, coming up this week, it'll be like 4. But yeah, we're going to be covering a lot of ground here because the final 6 chapters cover pretty much the entire last week of Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
So I think, like we referred to it last week, it's like almost a quarter of the book.
Right.
It is. Actually, it's a little bit more than a quarter of the book. Covers just the final week. So, yeah, we talked about the triumphal entry of Jesus into Jerusalem on Palm Sunday. So what did you think?
I liked that people, when he was coming, recognized that they needed to be saved.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That stood out to me. I made a note about that.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, they use the word Hosanna. It's kind of
Although they didn't necessarily stick to that later, did they?
many of them didn't.
But-
No. You know, it's really hard to know exactly. I mean, I know I referred in the message to how, you know, at the beginning of the week on Palm Sunday, everybody was welcoming Jesus in. And then, of course, just 5 days later, he's hung on a cross. I mean, we know that there was a large amount of people in Jerusalem. There are some people that think it could have been an upward of almost 1 million people. And, you know, so there was countless, probably tens of thousands at least, that welcomed Jesus into Jerusalem. But we don't know for sure, like, the percentage of, like, how many people were cheering and welcoming on Sunday, and then those who yelled crucify him on Friday. But one thing we can know for sure is that there was a large crowd on Palm Sunday that was there wanting him to come in, but that large crowd was not there trying to defend him when he went before Herod and Pilate and whatnot. So something happened in there, you know, and we'll kind of dive into that over the next couple of weeks because sometimes we one of the dangers that we can have when we're talking about Easter and Palm Sunday is, you know, like we talk about Palm Sunday one Sunday, and then the next week we go right to Easter, and we skip over those few days in between. And
There's a lot.
there's a lot of stuff going on in between, and we're going to dig into that next week. So, yeah, it is interesting. It's an interesting story as Jesus comes into the city, and of course he's living out the prophecy that we get from Zechariah about him walking in on coming in on a donkey. So yeah, it's a pretty cool. It's kind of a sweet scene.
Yeah.
As Jesus comes in.
And we talked about Jesus going into the temple late and like looking around kind of. What was he doing?
Yeah, so after the events earlier in the day when he came into the city, it says in the text that later that day, so it was probably close to twilight, something like that, he's going into the temple, and there's huge temple courts that are there, and it was probably not very busy by that time. So it's like he goes in there and he's just kind of like, I don't know, it's probably a time of a little bit of thought, prayer, coming into the city, knowing what's about to happen over the next few days.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's pretty. It's kind of a very solemn moment when he comes in. You have to remember the temple courts were pretty big, so you could just get this picture of Jesus walking into this beautiful courtyard that was probably, gosh, I wouldn't even know where to begin on square footage, but you know, probably at least 10,000 square feet. I mean, it's just a huge space where you just kind of, he's coming in there and just kind of thinking of what lies ahead. Yeah, what lies ahead in all this. Yeah, that's a moment we don't really hear much about when we talk about when you go straight from Easter or from Palm Sunday to Easter, and you don't really hear about that.
And then the part where he was upset about people, like buying and selling, and when he flipped the table. Okay, so last week I was looking at clothes online because you know, and there was a shirt that said "this close to flipping tables like Jesus," and the girl was like doing this, and I was like, what is that about? Because I don't remember ever hearing this story. And then we talked about it Sunday. I was like, oh, that's what that shirt meant.
Yeah. So, well, what did you? So here's a question for you. What did you think about that when you read that? When you initially, since this is a new kind of a new story,
I initially felt a little bit of shock.
Okay.
Because he's Jesus.
Yeah.
And he got angry.
Yeah, Jesus doesn't do those kinds of things.
Yeah.
Right?
But when I thought about it, I thought he had a good reason and a point. And
so what was the reason, you think?
They were taking the temple and making it something that it's not supposed to be.
Okay. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Am I right?
Yeah, in essence, that's what was happening. I mean, Jesus, in the text, he calls it a den of robbers. And see, what was going on in this point, in this period of history was there was a lot of, I don't want to spend a ton of time here, but there was a lot of political intrigue that was going on in Israel at this point. You had the Romans, who are the ultimate authorities. But what the Romans often did was that they would try, when it was possible, although not always, if they had a troublesome area, they wouldn't do this. But at this point, although about 30 or 40 years later, this would change because Jerusalem would be destroyed by the Romans in 70 AD. But in this period of time, things were somewhat stable. And so they would often put local people in charge. The Romans were still really in charge, but the local people would kind of be the administrators in charge. And they were often rewarded handsomely. You know, I mean, they were given money, wealth, power. And Herod was one of these people. But we also know that Pilate was also there as well. So you have these factions, sort of. And we're going to see a little bit more of that in the text we're looking at next
Like government?
Week. Yeah, there's like different layers of government, and then you throw into the mix the religious side of it, of what's going on at the temple. And the temple was administered by the high priest, who at this point was Annas.
Okay.
Annas, but he was kind of up in years. And the Romans kind of, they kind of liked having younger leaders in certain areas. And so Caiaphas, in the story, we're going to hear more of Caiaphas's name over the next few weeks. Caiaphas was sort of the symbolic high priest at this period. He wasn't the biblical high priest. Annas was that, because it was the high priest was supposed to pass down through family, through different, you know, that have, as the scripture laid it out. But Caiaphas wasn't really, but he was kind of considered the administrative. So you kind of have like Annas, who's really in charge, but you have Caiaphas, who kind of runs the show.
Right.
Okay, it's kind of weird, I know.
Manager.
It's kind of like I guess it would kind of be like, you know, if I own a restaurant, I own it, but then maybe I would have a manager that runs it. You know, it's kind of like the way it is. And what had happened years earlier is Caiaphas and some of the leaders of the temple there, they had decided that, you know what, we can make some money off of this whole thing. And so what they decided to do was to say, okay, when a person comes into the temple courts to buy a sacrifice, because when you have millions, if you have 1 million people coming there, I mean, they're not going to, and they're coming, some of them are coming from hundreds, maybe even 1,000 miles away. They can't bring their sacrifice with them because obviously, if you know, it's just a lot of work to care for the animal or bring the dead animal to the sacrifice. So they would sell the sacrifices there, which really wasn't what Jesus was upset about. I mean, Jesus understood the logistics and all this. The problem was that they had decided some years earlier that for a person to buy the sacrifice, they could only buy it by paying through local currency. So it would be like me, saying, you know what, at my store, you can only buy things with the American dollar, which generally that's the way it does work in the United States. Right. But what happened was that they would have money changers kind of as part of the business. Okay? So it would be, I guess the best way to describe it would be like if I was running a business and I said, okay, you can only buy my stuff with the American dollar. And oh, by the way, you can only exchange for it if you're from Mexico or Canada or wherever else. You can only exchange for that money through that guy that's sitting right outside my door.
Okay.
And so then what would happen is let's say if I went to...
So were they making money off of that?
Yeah, because the rates, the exchange rate was exorbitant.
Okay.
Like if I were to go to a normal one, I don't know, I don't keep up with the exchange rate. So please, if anybody's watching, don't think I mean this literally, but if a dollar is a dollar, or if I have a dollar and let's say a Canadian dollar is 80 cents, okay? If that's what the pretty much typical exchange rate is, that's okay. But what these guys were doing is they were saying, nope, because you're doing it at the temple, okay, that 80 cents is only gonna it means you're gonna have to, you're gonna get less out of it.
Okay.
Okay. And so they were ripping people off. And that's why Jesus said they were a den of robbers. They were ripping people off when they were exchanging the money to buy there in the temple. This was sort of a strange practice for them to force people to use a shekel to pay, because in that period, it wasn't uncommon for people to use multiple forms of currency. I mean, actually, in the United States, we're kind of a weird country in that way, because if you go in places around the world, I know when I went to Greece and Israel and places like that, you can use the American dollar in a lot of places. Okay. Actually, in some places they prefer it. So it's just kind of an odd practice, I guess, for us. But back then it was maybe even more odd. Yeah. So that's why Jesus comes in and he's really upset about it. That's where the anger comes from. Now, I guess the question I would have for you was his anger, is it okay for him to be angry? Because I thought anger is a bad thing.
Not when it's justified.
Okay. Well, what do you mean by justified?
Because they're not doing the right thing. Like, that's not for God. That's for them.
Okay.
So they're not. Does that make sense?
No, it makes total sense. It's righteous.
I think I know what I'm saying.
It's righteous anger. Like, we see it throughout the Old Testament with God. Like, there's places throughout the Old Testament talks about God being angry. Well, God's God. He's perfect. So it must be okay to be angry, but it has to be done for a righteous reason. And so Jesus is righteously angry about what they've done.
It's like they're taking advantage of God.
Yes. Yeah, that's where his righteous anger comes from. Now, I asked this question in my life group Sunday. Is it possible for us as humans to be righteously angry?
I don't know. Maybe?
Yeah. Yeah, that's kind of the conclusion I think we came to. I think that Jesus, or let me say this differently, we have certain limitations when it comes to anger, to being righteously angry, that Jesus did not, because Jesus was perfect. He was sinless. He always looked at things the right way. We
mess up all the time.
We mess up. Sin can very easily become a part. So like we might say, oh, I'm angry that somebody's doing this against God.
Maybe we can feel that way but not act upon it.
Yeah.
Or not feel I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I thought it was interesting how you started off where you talked about the shirt that you saw on Amazon. Yeah. And what did it say again? It said something about
like
I'm
this close to flipping tables like Jesus.
Yeah, so this close to flipping tables like Jesus.
Right.
Yeah, no.
But we're not like Jesus.
Yeah, see that's the thing. It's because we're going to flip tables because we're mad. We're going to flip tables because we're selfish.
Right. Not because people are taking advantage of God or
right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so that's why when it comes to righteous anger, we got to be really, really careful. So, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, it is a shocking story though.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah.
I liked it.
Yep.
It was
Yep.
like a different side.
Yeah.
I think that's all I had.
Yeah.
As
Yeah,
far as,
and the biggest thing
questions
with the
and-
message, just to kind of sum it up, was that we were talking about being prepared.
Mhm.
That we want to be prepared for Jesus'
And
arrival.
getting ready is being ready.
Getting ready is being ready, although sometimes we think we're ready when we're not, because
I don't
a lot
think
of
you
it's
can ever be ready.
a lot of it's superficial. You know, we got to be very
Yeah.
careful not to be superficially ready.
Mhm.
That's why it's important for us to deepen our relationship with God and to grow in our relationship with God. And hopefully we're doing that.
Mhm.
So, yeah.
Yeah.
It was a good week. It was a good lesson, kind of looked at it in a different way
Mhm.
than maybe those, that maybe we typically look at it. So, yeah.
And what's this week?
So, this week we're going to be digging more into the week here. And so what Jesus is sharing with us this week, there's actually 3 interactions we're going to look at. And really it's going to come down to understanding what is it that belongs to God and what belongs to us. And we're going to look at debt. He uses a parable. He has a couple of interactions with a couple of different groups of religious leaders. So we're going to kind of dive into that, and hopefully we'll see that we need to be wiser in understanding of what life really is about, that we can't create life. We have to allow God to help us to see life for what it is. So we're going to dig into that this week.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
All right.
Yep.
Well, cool. All right. We'll see you guys next week as we continue the Mark series and walk through the last week of Jesus' life. So have a good week, and we'll see you then.
What do you think about that, Shelby?
I don't know soccer. Hi, everybody. Welcome to Dive Deep. I'm Shelby Cornett, and I'm the ministry assistant. Okay, gotta start over. Because I could see Travis talking along.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5,
Blah,
6,
blah,
7.
blah.
Yeah.
Blah, blah, blah.
That's the most profound
Blah,
thing you've said
blah.
today, Shelby.
I'm feeling
Thank
really
you for that.
profound
Thank
today.
you for
1, 2,
4,
3,
5, 6,
blah, blah.
4, 5,
Blah,
6,
blah, blah.
7, 8, 9, 10.
Blah, blah.
4, 5,
Blah,
6,
blah, blah.
7, 8, 9, 10,
1, 2,
11, 12,
3.
13, 14.
Blah, blah, blah.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Trucks, trucks, trucks.